Video 79, Article 5, Research and Evaluation Area 8, MCHES Subcompetencies 8.1.1. Review the learning objectives for this video. Welcome to our discussion of Article 5, and I am really glad you are here for this one. Article 5 addresses your responsibility in research and evaluation, and this is especially important for you as a Master Certified Health Education Specialist candidate. You are someone who will frequently design research studies and program evaluations that collect data from real people, and that is a tremendous responsibility. Understanding these principles will serve you well, not only on your exam, but every single time you work with human participants throughout your career. So let us start with the foundation of ethical research, which is the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. This independent committee reviews research proposals to make sure that participant rights and welfare are protected before any data collection begins. You must obtain IRB approval before collecting any data from human subjects, and there are no exceptions to this rule. Now here is some important context for why this system exists. The IRB was established in response to historical abuses in research, most notably the Tuskegee syphilis study, where African American men were deliberately denied treatment for syphilis for decades without their knowledge or consent. This tragic case, along with others, led to the development of the Belmont Report in 1979, which established the core principles of respect for persons, beneficence, and justice that guide all human subjects research today. There are 3 levels of IRB review that you should know for your exam. Exempt review applies to minimal risk research such as anonymous surveys or analysis of existing public data. Expedited review covers research involving no more than minimal risk that falls within specific defined categories. Full board review is required for studies involving vulnerable populations such as children, prisoners, or pregnant individuals, or research involving more than minimal risk to participants. The second key principle is voluntary participation, and this one really matters. Participants must agree freely without coercion, intimidation, or undue influence. You cannot penalize people for declining to participate, and your incentives must not be so large that they essentially compel participation. A $50 gift card may be appropriate compensation for someone's time, but $5,000 could constitute undue influence, particularly for economically disadvantaged participants who might feel unable to decline such a significant amount. Third, you must report all findings honestly, regardless of whether the results support your hypothesis. Negative results are just as scientifically important as positive ones, and suppressing unfavorable findings distorts the evidence base that other professionals rely on. You owe that honesty to every colleague and community member who depends on accurate evidence. Now let us talk about something that I really want you to feel confident about, because this is one of the most frequently tested concepts on your certification exam. The distinction between confidentiality and anonymity is also one of the most commonly confused concepts in professional practice, so mastering it now will serve you beautifully in both contexts. Confidentiality means the researcher knows participant identities but takes deliberate steps to protect them from disclosure to anyone outside the research team. The researcher might assign code numbers to each participant and store the master list linking codes to names in a separate password-protected secure location. Data is analyzed and reported using codes only, but the researcher could theoretically trace responses back to specific individuals if needed. Anonymity is a stronger form of protection. It means that even the researcher cannot identify who provided which data. No identifying information is collected at any point during the study. This might involve unsigned paper surveys deposited in a sealed box or an online survey specifically configured not to collect IP addresses, email addresses, or any other identifying information. Here is the critical exam point that I really want you to remember, because this is where many candidates get tripped up. A large number of health educators incorrectly promise anonymity when their study design can only offer confidentiality. If your online survey platform automatically records IP addresses, your study is not anonymous even if you never look at those addresses. If you conduct one-on-one interviews, your study cannot be anonymous because you can see and hear the participant directly. If you facilitate focus groups, anonymity is impossible because multiple participants and the researcher are present together in the same room. Also, and this is important for your practice, certain situations create legal limits on confidentiality that must be disclosed in advance. If a participant discloses child abuse, elder abuse, or intent to harm themselves or others, mandatory reporting laws in most states may require the researcher to break confidentiality and report to appropriate authorities. You must disclose these limits clearly during the informed consent process so that participants understand exactly what protections you can and cannot guarantee. Knowing this distinction inside and out is going to give you a real advantage on exam day. Now let us walk through the informed consent process for research, and I want you to see how this builds on what you already know. Informed consent in research goes beyond the general program consent we discussed in Article 4. Research consent has additional requirements because participants are contributing to knowledge generation, which involves unique risks and considerations. You are going to find that understanding these steps deeply will help you in so many exam scenarios. Step 1 involves explaining the purpose of the research clearly in language the participant understands. Describe what the study is about, what questions you are trying to answer, what will be asked of participants, how long participation takes, and where activities will occur. Translate all technical jargon into plain, accessible language. A participant should never have to guess what they are agreeing to, and making that effort shows real respect for the people you serve. Step 2 requires honestly describing all potential risks and benefits. Risks in health education research might include physical discomfort from a blood draw or fitness assessment, psychological distress from answering sensitive questions about trauma or substance use, social stigma if participation in a study about a sensitive topic becomes known to others, or economic costs such as lost wages from time away from work. Benefits should also be described honestly without exaggeration. Compensation must be described clearly and must be reasonable rather than coercive, as we discussed earlier. Step 3 is critical, and you will recognize this from our earlier conversation about confidentiality and anonymity. You must accurately state whether participant data will be kept confidential or will be truly anonymous. Promising anonymity when your study design can only provide confidentiality is a direct violation of informed consent requirements. You must also disclose any limits to confidentiality, such as mandatory reporting requirements for disclosures of abuse or imminent harm. Step 4 confirms the voluntary nature of participation. Participants must understand they can decline without any penalty, withdraw from the study at any time without consequences, and skip individual questions they find uncomfortable without being required to leave the entire study. For your exam preparation, remember that informed consent is not a single event, but an ongoing process throughout the research. If procedures change, if new risks are identified, or if the study direction shifts significantly, you must go back to participants and reobtain their consent based on the updated information. You are building a really strong foundation here, and this understanding of informed consent is going to come up again and again in your professional life. Read the scenario stem aloud. Give students 30 seconds to consider options before advancing. The correct answer is B. The correct answer is B. This scenario tests your understanding of the critical distinction between confidentiality and anonymity, which is one of the most commonly tested concepts in Area 8. Focus groups are inherently non-anonymous because the researcher and all other participants can see and hear each person's responses during the discussion. No amount of data protection after the fact can change the reality that identities were known during the session. Promising anonymity in this context is factually inaccurate and violates the informed consent requirements under Article 5. The researcher should correct the consent language to accurately describe what the study can actually offer, which is confidentiality, not anonymity. Option A ignores the ethical problem entirely by conflating what happens in the report with what happens during data collection. Not using names in the final report does not make the focus group anonymous because identities were visible throughout the discussion itself. Option C is an overreaction that abandons a valid and valuable qualitative methodology unnecessarily. The solution is simply to use the correct terminology, not to redesign the entire study. Option D attempts to redefine anonymity in a misleading way that would confuse participants about the actual level of protection their identities receive. The ethical action is straightforward. Correct the consent language to say confidential instead of anonymous and ensure participants understand exactly what protections are in place. Summarize the key takeaways.